Afternoon and evening. Welcome to our Rethinking Webcast program. Rethinking is our global thought leadership program. With Rethinking, we strive to bring to you a variety of topics facing the financial services industry today, with the help of our subject matter experts, clients, and partners. I'm Robin Zhang, Director of Marketing at Thought Machine North America. Today, I'm thrilled to bring to you an amazing panel of industry leaders. But before we start, I want to go through a few administrative items. We will be taking questions throughout the session. Please use the Q&A window on your online dashboard, and we will do our very best to answer all the questions. In any event we run out of time, we will follow up accordingly. There will be a couple of polling questions during the session as well, and these questions are simply designed to engage audience participation in the panel discussions. Slides will be sent to you via email after the webcast, and replay will be available online at thoughtmachine.net/rethinking. This is also the website of our Rethinking program, where you will find a schedule for the upcoming webcasts and other interesting thought leadership assets. Finally, at the end of the webcast, there will be a very brief survey, and we very much appreciate if you can take a few seconds to provide your feedback about our webcast. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to today's moderator, Brad Steele. Brad?
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webcast. My name is Brad Steele. I'm the GM for Thought Machine North America, and I also run our global partner organization. And prior to Thought Machine, I spent about a decade at AWS, so today's discussion is certainly a topic near and dear to my heart. We've got a great panel today, as Robin said, representing all corners of the cloud-native ecosystem. So let's kick off with a quick round of introductions from our panel of experts. Fabien, why don't I start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Fabien Siddiqui. I am a director of cloud engineering here at Thought Machine. I work on security engineering, cloud infrastructure, and production operations. And we use a lot of cloud-native technologies. I'm the Thought Machine representative at CNCF as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Nicole Berry?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Barry. I lead our cloud customer engineering team for financial services, so for retail banking and payments in the UK. Thanks for having me here today.
How about Tobias?
Hi, Brad, and everyone else. I'm Tobias. I'm CTO here at the SEBX, which is an innovation hub within SEB, who's one of the biggest Nordic banks. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Nicole Lanza, that'd be great if you could head us out.
Thanks, Brad. Nicole Lanza, I lead cloud for banking for Accenture North America. So I work with many of our banking customers on their cloud transformation journeys.
Great. So we have two Nicoles on the panel, so I'm going to be referring to them as Nicole Accenture and Nicole Google to keep things perfectly straight. Before we dive into the first question, or before we turn over the panel, I want to open up a question to the audience to give our panelists a better understanding of where you all are in your cloud journey. So this is, let me get this up here for you. We're going to be talking about a question of where are you in your cloud journey, and this could be from we haven't even gotten started, we're just beginning, we're deep in it, but we haven't reached it yet. We're fully there, or we just don't know. So if you could take a few seconds and go ahead and fill out the, click on your answer. That will take about a minute for us to get those results. So we're just going to hop right over to the first question as we wait for that. So I want to talk about, obviously this panel is about cloud native. There are a lot of different terms out there floating around. You got cloud native, cloud enabled, cloud supported, in the cloud. It's easy to conflate all of them, and they're not often used properly, leading to what is often referred to as cloud washing. So today we're talking about cloud native. I want to hear from several of you in the panel your perspective of what does it mean to be truly cloud native versus running in the cloud? What are some of the core principles or distinguishing characteristics of cloud native versus being cloud-based or cloud-enabled? Fabien, how about we start off with you?
Sure. So when I think of cloud-native applications, I think of a series of characteristics, things around immutable infrastructure, elastic scaling or horizontal scaling, availability across different data centers, disaster recovery, really big part of that as well. There's a big aspect of security as well, physical security and logical security as well. So a lot of applications that I would consider to be cloud native are applications that have been designed from the ground up to take advantage of this. So a lot of these concepts aren't really new in the industry. They've been around for a while, but cloud native or cloud infrastructure really allows you to take advantage of all of these things and do that in a simpler way, and to be able to embed that from the beginning. Some applications that I wouldn't consider to be kind of truly cloud native would be if they were designed before that and kind of shifted into the cloud, I guess.
So that would be, okay, perhaps some cloud washing if those are being claimed to be cloud native from your perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Nicole, Google, how about we hop over to you? I'd love your perspective. I'm sure you can add on to that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely interesting thinking about cloud native apps from a technical perspective, but I think there's an additional lens to assess this through in terms of the maturity of an organization looking to move to cloud. So is it kind of on the tactical side in terms of short-term goals around cost optimization, or actually are they looking to achieve longer-term, more transformational goals around innovation and kind of driving business value out of cloud adoption? So I think there's that in terms of the maturity of an organization. And one other aspect that I would definitely call out, and this is regardless of whether you're an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service within the cloud stack, is all around automation and having that kind of repeatable infrastructure, ability to kind of spin up new environments extremely quickly and kind of give that agility. And really reduce the manual effort around application deployment. So for me, those are kind of the two key additional things I would consider.
Okay. Nicole Lanza from Accenture, love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think that the last two explanations were spot on. I think the automation is key, but the way I think of it is a little bit more sort of, how do you explain this to the business? And it's really about making sure that you're taking full advantage of the services that are made available to you with speed in a cloud native environment. So you're not building things yourself unless you really have to. You're not sort of bolting something on or moving it into the environment unless that's really critical. But you're taking full advantage of it, and that allows you to drive speed and sort of really take advantage of infrastructure and code and provisioning environments quickly, as as Google was saying. But I think it's about creating an environment that is as a service, right? And everybody sort of consumes it without human intervention as much as possible. And that's really hard to get to outside of a public cloud provider. It's possible, but it takes significantly more investment and build time to make that happen. So when you look at cloud native, what we typically see from an SI perspective is that the business value is found really more in a cloud native environment than any other cloud architecture setup.
So that's a really good point. You talk about the business value, and what everybody just shared was largely about what it means to the development teams, to the infrastructure teams and the business. What does it mean? What about from a customer, an end user perspective? What are the benefits? It's clear benefit to the company, to the that's using cloud native principles, cloud native architecture. But how about from the consumer of a cloud native application, the end customer? What would be noticeable benefits to them? And that's really, I'll just kind of open that up to anyone who might want to share. Yeah, sure.
I'll take that.
Okay.
I'll take that.
Maybe,
so I'll start there. Just what we generally see is that the client gets a different experience, which is much faster and a much more data-driven experience that can be highly customized for for whatever they want to do, right? So it allows the business to sort of target the customer and give sort of very specific feedback in response, and allows a very different interaction with the customer, which is highly automated in a way that's much harder to do in pure an on-prem or even sort of a complex hybrid environment.
Yeah, thank you. Fabien, you had your hand raised, I think.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think just to add to that, just on the velocity at which you can develop features, both at the application level and the infrastructure level, it's I think something that Nicole touched on before. It's the speed at which you can do all of this stuff. I think there's another aspect as well around the reliability of the systems. Systems developed in the cloud tend to be significantly more reliable. The availability is much higher. You can have the application distributed across different data centers or even different regions. You can have the application close to where the customer is. So if they're in Europe, you could have it deployed into a data center in Europe. Latency is lower. They get a much better user experience there. If they're in the US, you could also deploy a replica over there and have a better experience there as well.
Yeah, great point. Nicole Berry, did you have something as well? It looked like, I think at one point you were raising your hand.
Probably really just kind of adding to some of the comments already made around personalization and that kind of seamless experience. So I think when I'm a consumer and I'm ordering a takeaway, which I do sometimes, or a taxi, it's so slick, so seamless, such a really quick experience. And the personalization aspect in terms of you feel like you're kind of well known in terms of your expectations and what you're looking for, and also data that makes sense to you. And so if we take that and we apply that kind of from a banking perspective, and that new feature release into a mobile app, how quickly decisions can be made on loans and that automation behind it, I think that's really the benefit, and passing that through to the end customer.
Yeah. Tobias, you've done this. You've personally done this with SebX, made a conscious decision to do what you did in terms of building this outside the bank, if you will. Were there end customer driving features or functionality or benefits that drove you to that decision?
Absolutely, I would say, Brad. I think, from my perspective, being an engineer, I'm kind of leaning towards what Fabien is saying in terms of what we can get from a technical perspective in the cloud, in terms of resilience and reach and whatnot, right? I think it's just amazing. But I also tend to lean more towards what Nicole and Nicole is talking about, sort of the business value. And I think from an SEBX perspective, but comparing to the incumbent part of SEB, I think we really needed to push this, because all of the what I call commodity, the undifferentiated heavy lifting that the bank has to do today, is pretty much hindering us from being really sort of agile and flexible in terms of meeting our customer needs. So I think it's absolutely necessary for us to not do that commodity part of the infrastructure and have someone else who's better at it to do it. That adds to us safety, even though I'd say that regulators are not really there, but they're starting to understand that in some sense, it's safer and a lot better for having someone else to deal with it that doesn't do anything than deal with this. I don't want to focus on that too much. It's super important part of what we do as a bank. But if I can focus more on sort of the business value add towards our end customers, then I'm super happy, right? So that's kind of where I come from. I think there's a lot of cool stuff you can do from a technical perspective, and that's due to the fact that it's their business model, right? It's Google's and AWS business model. My business model is not about doing that, which I call is commodity, right? I need to focus on the problems I want to solve for my users, and the cloud allows me to focus more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the specific technologies and platforms that enable cloud native architectures from each of your experiences? Fabien, I'll just kick it over to you if you have a thought on that.
Sure, yeah. So I think, there are many different technologies that I think are extremely important in cloud native architectures. I would say the two main ones that stand out are Kubernetes and Docker. So Docker is a tool to containerize applications, to basically have a full package of what each application is with all of its dependencies and so on. And Kubernetes is a critical critical part of the systems that we develop, and I'm sure that a lot of other people use as well, to orchestrate these containers. You end up, as we've spoken about earlier on, you end up generally with many services, microservice architecture, and you have to be able to orchestrate all of these things on the cloud. You've got machines, virtual machines coming in and out of existence, and you need to be able to schedule these onto different machines as they come up automatically. And Kubernetes is critical in doing that. And I think it's safe to say now that Kubernetes has won the battle there. There are a bunch of other orchestration systems, container orchestration systems out there, but I think Kubernetes is by far the most popular. So I would say those two are the main technologies that enable this.
Yeah, a good segue to Nicole Barry from GCP. What anything you'd like to add from that perspective that you've seen your bank clients applying?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Kubernetes is very close to my heart as a Googler, and one aspect that I think is really critical to call out is obviously the kind of open source nature of some of these underpinning technologies. And that's really a kind of critical aspect from the bank's perspective, to give them the ability to run what they want, where they want, and have that choice and that flexibility in terms of deployment locations and deployment architectures. So Kubernetes obviously underpinning that. And going back to the point that Fabien made around sort of reliability, kind of scalability and resiliency, underpinning all of those kind of key requirements and benefits from a cloud native perspective.
Okay. And Nicole Lanza from Accenture, anything that we're missing that, you're in an advisory capacity, sort of top of the funnel as all these banks are beginning to think about or make that transformation. Anything that we're missing that is coming out of your shop? Thanks.
There's a lot to it. So we typically see Terraform and Ansible being critical to setting up environments, cloud native environments for our banking and all financial services customers. And the reason for that is because that's the way of driving the automation. So you're spinning up the services in such a way that they can be compliant with the risk and regulatory posture of the firm whenever we want them to be, right? So it's by default, right? And you can prevent anyone from spinning up a service and making it available in such a way that they can't, they can do whatever they want. You can't have that in banking, right? We need a high degree of control in enabling the environment in order to give our developers what they need in order to build an application, but at the same time, we have to satisfy the risk and regulatory posture. We can't have PII data out in the world, right? So we find that Terraform and Ansible are two of the most common tools. I'd highly recommend looking at those if you haven't. And there's certainly all sorts of security risk and compliance tools in the financial service world that allow you to speed that. We see Black Duck for scanning. There's a laundry list, really, of things that we typically see from a security and risk perspective.
Yeah. Tobias, anything from your perspective, particularly around security and compliance, but I don't want to pigeonhole you there, but anything that was missed that you found particularly beneficial?
One thing that I would emphasize on is kind of building on what Fabien and Nicole said about Kubernetes. And I think currently now it's the best abstraction layer that there is. It enables me to, if need be, I can actually move provider. When I say abstraction layer, basically what I'm trying to aim at is that I want my product teams, my engineers, to be able to do everything they can to ship a product in a as small context as ever possible, right? And that to me is really the Docker container, right? And then I want to buy basically Kubernetes as a service, which you can do today, basically. And that to me creates an abstraction layer that I really like, because then I could potentially move around, and it's very easy for me to sort of put that in a context of what I expect from a developer and a product engineering team.
Yeah.
And just to add to what Tobias was saying, so at Thought Machine, our applications are cloud agnostic, so we deploy across AWS, GCP, and Azure. And I would say the most important decision that we made was to use Kubernetes from the beginning for exactly that reason. It is that abstraction layer between the underlying infrastructure and what the application developers can expect. And that was, I think, by far one of the best decisions that we made there to enable cloud agnostic applications.
Yeah, and just to add to that, to what Fabien is saying, I think when I look at vendors and different providers of tooling and systems, that's one of the things I look at as well, right? I need to be able to move even them if need be in this case, and I think it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Good advice to the audience. Although I'm going to push out the results, I hope everyone can see this. Here's the results. So perhaps we're preaching to the choir. We got just half here, 50% already fully in the cloud. So that is music to Nicole Berry's ears at GCP. But I think music to all of our ears, since we all fundamentally believe heavily in this. But very interesting distribution across those who haven't even gotten started, those that are just beginning, and those that don't know. Interesting data points here. Going to put another polling question to the audience. And this is around we're going to kind of transition into concerns and blockers and risks of cloud migration. It can be a heavy lift. But if you could, in the crowd, highlight what are your top 2 concerns, doesn't have to be stack rank, but your top 2 concerns about migrating to cloud or going native. And we will follow up on that shortly. So let's go ahead. Let me push this out. Sorry. Let's go ahead and push to the next question for the audience. So we've established what it means to be cloud native. How to snuff out cloud washers. You're all engaged at different stages of cloud transformations with clients or within your own company. From your experience and perspective, what would you categorize as the top challenges or obstacles or risks to becoming cloud native, and perhaps how you overcame them or mitigated them? Nicole Berry at GCP, I'd love to get your perspective as a start.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So one thing that I've seen, I think, come up time and time again has very much been around sort of existing knowledge and skills base relating to cloud and cloud technologies, where there can be challenges there in terms of in-house knowledge of particular technology offerings and services, but also around migration approaches and what the right approach might be to move to cloud. And we can see a dependency, I guess, on the cloud provider, professional services organizations, partners, systems integrators to provide those skills, which can absolutely be a challenge. But there's benefits to that as well in terms of bringing in that external knowledge, and the mitigation there is having the right team set up and structure to do knowledge transfer as you progress on that journey towards kind of cloud adoption and cloud migration. So you've got that continuous flow of skills and knowledge coming from those external parties, and that continuous learning program happening within the bank or the organization that's moving towards cloud.
Thank you. Good. Tobias, transfer to you. You've done it. What were some apprehensions? What were some concerns you needed to mitigate or get over?
So yeah, I've done it a couple of times, and it's interesting. I haven't seen it so much here now at SEBX, but working with third-party providers or vendors, it can actually be a problem, right? So even if I'm completely in the cloud, and my third-party vendor is not there yet, and I kind of I've been pushing different companies to go there, and even threatening with ending our contracts with them. So that's one thing that some people don't even think about, but it's a key thing for us who doesn't have the entire value chain. And then of course, banking, the regulatory challenge is tough, right? And we need to find ways. I think I'm hoping, and I really want the regulators to be sort of on the ball here. They aren't just yet. There's a lot of things that needs to happen before we can sort of do this in a good way together. I've spent a couple of years in the gambling industry, which is also heavily regulated, of course, depending on in what country and region. But I would say they're a bit more sort of forward-leaning there, and really trying to see the benefits of us going cloud. So those two, I would say, are the big topics for me.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate you bringing in the kind of the regional variability to it as well. Nicole Lanza from Accenture, your perspective on what your clients, how they're reacting to this as you're guiding them on that digital transformation strategy.
Yeah, we actually collected data on this topic. So we surveyed 100 banking clients for our banking clients, and we collected data. And this is one of the key topics that we asked. You know, what are you worried about? And this certainly the top three were security, risk, and compliance, talent, right? You know, making sure you have the right talent and skills in the organization, and application complexity, right? So just the complexity of apps in the banking world are often these applications, particularly ones that interact with the mainframe in any way, have been there for 25 plus years, and you just added code to it instead of actually doing a major rewrite. So you end up with something really sticky. And we're actually now in the process of measuring that stickiness and that complexity with our clients, and going to dive deeper into that. But so we see those things, but a lot of those things don't have to be challenges now. So the problems that many of us tackled 5 years ago when the financial services world was new to public cloud, a lot of those problems have been figured out, right? And standards have been set, and capabilities have been built into our public cloud providers that allow us to use those services in a way natively that actually meet our risk and compliance posture. So you can get through a lot of this stuff now today if you're starting today, or if you're early in your journey, it doesn't have to be as complex as it was a few years ago.
Yeah, this is interesting. I'm going to push these audience results out. I don't know I hope you can all see all of them. So regulatory compliance, topping the list, and then complexity / cost to migrate, number 2. Very interesting that security 0. Now, perhaps it's the way the answers are given. Maybe security and regulatory compliance would be maybe some folk that answered that as a security, but interesting to see security at 0. Very interesting, because I think back 10 years ago, that was the number one thing. So I think the cloud providers have done a good job sort of, giving the market confidence that, hey, you're better off with us, or with GCP or with AWS, helping with your security profile across, using the best practices across millions of customers than trying to roll it on your own. Is there anything here? I'm curious to the panel, just anything that surprises you of these results? Is there anything? Let's talk about vendor lock-in. I'm sure Nicole at Google has an opinion about this, but is that a myth? Is that a legit concern from anyone's perspective?
So I think from my perspective, all of these are challenges that are perceived by our customers and the organizations that we're working with to one extent or another. So it's probably pivoted more to how do we help address some of these challenges and help our customers navigate some of these decisions that they have to make. And I talk specifically about kind of openness and open source and having those options to deploy your application to your kind of platform of choice and move between cloud providers and on-prem, and really have that hybrid and kind of multi-cloud strategy as part of it. So I think there's a lot more awareness now about the options that are available there, and critically the technology offerings and services that underpin that and give that choice. That gives a lot more confidence in that space.
Yeah. Internal cultural.
Sorry, Brad. I just want to agree with Nicole. I think the awareness is a lot bigger right now than it used to be, and I think people are much more conscious about the choices they make. So I think we've come a long way in the learning in that sense.
How about the too complex or too expensive to migrate? Half the crowd selected that as one of the reasons, and that's in many ways it's sort of the showstopper. They just can't even get out of the gate if they view it as heavy complexity or cost. I would imagine, Nicole Lanza, that this is something that you would encounter quite a bit in your role when working with banks.
We do, and we see that. So obviously we see this a lot, and there's some interesting things going on in the industry right now that are it's sort of a moment in our industry with regard to cloud investment options. So what we see in any transformation is that it takes investment to actually make the transition happen. And at the same time, you still have to run the business. And so you have this bubble of cost on the front end, which it can be difficult to absorb. And what we find now, that something that's going on now, which probably won't last forever, is that there's a great deal of investment coming from cloud service providers to help fund the transformation, frankly, right? Discounts, help, and the truth is that, this really there'll be an end to this, right? Once the cloud service providers end up with a certain amount of capacity used, right, in their environments, the investment options are going to wane. And so if you're not having these conversations now, you could miss the train, right? So don't miss that opportunity. If you're, it sounds like, I know a lot of folks are already operating in the cloud. If you're operating in the cloud and you've got, 10 applications and you're experimenting, that's one thing. Large scale migrations are something else entirely. That's where, you have an opportunity to sort of make something happen that's substantial, and to share the risk essentially with, the industry. So you don't want to miss that boat. Yeah.
What about from a regulatory compliance perspective, Nicole, just staying with you also, this is I think we have largely I think a lot of the audience today is out of EMEA, but a fair share out of the US as well. On the regulatory side, I'm not sure actually, Nicole, if you advise across globally, if you're just focused in the US, perhaps you can enlighten us there, but is this something that is becoming easier to mitigate, or does it just keep getting harder and harder because of the regulatory environment and the complexity?
I'm a consultant, and so my answer is going to be both. What we see is, so I do operate officially. I own North America, but I've been helping with Europe for many years as well. So in Europe really has GDPR. In Canada, you have the OSFI compliance requirements. There's no shortage of new laws that sort of come on the books, and you have to think about data sovereignty and how to manage all of that, and really not just in the cloud, often across your landscape. So it has to be a deliberate management exercise. However, there are things on the market now that help you with this. Each of the cloud service providers sort of has a version of their cloud that they call sort of financial services cloud. And what that does is it allows you to have a lot of the risk and regulatory requirements built into how the cloud is enabled for the firm, right? So again, we've talked about the control lane, and again, this is again something that Kubernetes is very useful for helping to drive. Kubernetes and Terraform and all of this, and all of the cloud service providers have worked with the financial services firms now, and so you can solve for a lot of this now. Now, the data sovereignty laws are likely to continue to evolve. That's what we're seeing, and it is something that we're going to have to continue to manage actively. But we're getting better at this, and we're used to it. What I've done with clients in the past is you look very carefully about the data that needs to actually be put in the cloud, right? You don't just sort of say, okay, this workload goes, right? What kind of workload is it? What kind of resiliency is required for it? What kind of data is in it from an international perspective in terms of data location? So what kind of location requirements get imposed from a regulatory nature? And if you examine it before you actually move anything, then you can often remove things. So what we find is that software developers in our firms get used to doing things a certain way, and it never occurs to them to change unless somebody says, hey, we now, why don't we consider this instead? So that you end up with more flexibility operating in a cloud environment, but you're not actually putting the firm at risk. So, we're used to guiding folks through this. We do this all the time, and we've been doing this for many years. It does, if you're new to it, it does take some practice, and it can take some shift in how the engineers work. And in the banking community, sometimes that's how the modelers work, right? So we have folks that like to experiment with data in our world, and it's important to think differently about how you categorize that data for the purpose of moving it into a cloud environment.
That's great advice. Yeah. It was mentioned earlier along this question, I think one of the two Nicole's mentioned something about multi-cloud strategy. There's a question from the audience on just perhaps elaborating a little bit on the multi-cloud approach and how that helps perhaps mitigate some of these concerns. Nicole Barry, want to take a shot at that?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely add some thoughts around that one. So we work with a number of organisations that have multi-cloud strategies, and that's really kind of touching on some of those points that we covered earlier, and also that Tobias mentioned in terms of choice and portability and the ability to move between on-prem and cloud providers, and really giving that abstraction and that flexibility about where you might choose to deploy your workloads. So there's the kind of underpinning technology requirements that support multi-cloud. And then I think the second aspect to it that we see is really around the access to innovation. All of the cloud providers and Google spend a lot of time in research and developing new products and bringing new capabilities, which we develop to support our own kind of consumer applications and then make available. And some examples there in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And multi-cloud strategies can help you take advantage of that innovation across multiple providers and really think about using the right technology offering and the right service that's kind of fit for your needs and your requirements as an organization.
Very helpful. I want to take a moment. There's a really interesting question that came in, and this is jumping back a little bit to the beginning around what the difference between cloud native or what is cloud native versus some of the other forms of cloud of what folks think they are, where they think they are in the cloud. And it might be a little hard without being able to have a real conversation about it, but I'm going to pose it. So this person talks about, we don't want to be a cloud washer. We use all the we use the Terraforms, the Dockers, K8s. We're on GCP. We're doing all those things, but does that necessarily make us cloud native? Or perhaps are we just sort of cloud enabled or cloud based? Is there a fundamental thing? Maybe you're using the right tools and you're running on the right platform. But is there one thing that might be like, well, but if this isn't there, it's truly not cloud native? It may be a hard question to cover without a full discourse, but I'm just going to throw it out there. See if anyone wants to take a stab.
I'll tackle this. So I don't worry about this too much, right? I mean, what I care about with my clients is, are you getting business value out of cloud? So to some extent, yes, we want, we see maximum business value in the more cloud native implementations, full stop, right? The trick is that you just have to stay focused on getting business value out of it, right? And that's really what matters, as opposed to whether or not you're meeting a definition. And one way of doing that is by just making sure that you have a FinOps sort of function supporting your infrastructure and your cloud environment and your cloud program. And this, if you're constantly measuring and feeding back value, the sort of improvement opportunities, right, from a cost perspective, you're taking in information in terms of, which reserved instances have we used and not used. Okay, now we know more and we can do that more efficiently. And you can iterate on that through your FinOps program, then you end up driving towards this efficient model, right? And so that's really what I worry about. I don't worry about the definition too much. These things can become holy wars, which, those of us who've worked in technology for a long time have lived through a number of them. So I don't worry about it too much, but I do think that what we see is the more a client is operating in a public cloud provider, maximizing the services available to them in that provider, maximizing the ISVs available in that provider, the clearer the business value statement is.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. We'll leave it at that. I appreciate you taking a stab at that. Very, very good, very solid answer. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. So we've discussed the challenges of going native. We've talked about cloud migration. Going native requires just a massive paradigm shift on how you architect and develop software. It can require significant changes to a company's operational model, to its systems management, to development mindset, skill sets, and team culture. It's all pretty overwhelming. How should for those on the call who are not in the cloud yet, or thinking about it, or just partially, how should they start? Where does a bank start? How should they start thinking about moving to the cloud? What are the kind of critical steps to begin planning out in their journey as they make that transition? Nicole, I'm gonna go back to you again, because this is where you're doing this every day. So I'm gonna start with you, and then we'll
Sure, I'm sure. I hope the audience isn't getting tired of my voice, but absolutely. So what we see is that the talent challenge right now is real in this space, and we recommend starting with talent, right? First, start by driving the skills into your engineering programs, right? So first you have to change the nature of work, how the work gets done. And that really starts with building cloud engineering skills into your organization. And those engineers actually really help lead you into the cloud. It's just true. The sort of top-down approach of saying, you know, we're going to do this. All right, we're going to have 1,000 applications in the cloud by the end of the year. Doesn't actually work until you have the skills in the organization, right, in order to do it. So we definitely see that work, and it enables a shift that it even goes beyond that into sort of more of a product-driven approach to managing the services in your business, and you end up with immense speed. I actually have one client that told us recently that by going through this shift, this is a rather mature, large bank, they said they have so much technology capacity right now after having gone through this that they actually don't know what to do with it. They're like looking around for things to do, you know, for their engineers to go experiment, right? That's, you know, this is a beautiful target state that's easy to achieve when you are a well-funded large-scale bank. Not everybody's in that state, but imagine getting to that level of efficiency and speed with your engineers. That's what becomes possible with cloud. So I say start there, start with talent, start by knowing how you want to get value out of it, right? We started sounding like a consultant, but of course it's top line growth, bottom line savings. What are your opportunities there? Figure out what your business can do with cloud today that maybe it couldn't do even a year or two ago, and how can you operate more efficiently in the cloud? If you think about it in those ways, I think you get there. But it's a team sport, and you really need to make sure that everybody's doing it together, particularly in a bank where you have folks who we appreciate the controls that they apply to the organization because they keep us compliant, and they need to do that. It's the absolutely critical function, but we have to work with them in a new way to more of a secure by design, building things on the front end together instead of, you know, these sort of a gated approach that many of the banks, you know, still use in their culture, right? There's a major cultural shift.
Yeah, major. Tobias, I want to turn over to you, being on the other end of the spectrum here. And where did SEBX think, or what SEB think about starting?
I think, I mean, SEBX in itself is it's isolated just so that we can test these things without having to care about the legacy too much, right? So that's one way of doing it. You decide you do it on the side and see how it grows, right? How you then transition becomes a bigger question, right? I've done a couple of sort of major shifts before, and including a couple of cloud journeys, and I think it's extremely context-based, depending on what kind of legacy you have and what kind of surroundings you have. If you've solved the competence problem, then great, but you still need to figure out how you actually do the transition, right? A large part of me, especially as I grow older, tends to go evolutionary. I don't want to do big revolutions. I don't want to move everything. I want to do bit by bit, slowly, get the understanding of it, and then get the sort of snowball rolling, right? SEBX is not like that. We're doing it on our own, completely on the side. How we do the transition later on, I don't know. But I'm starting to understand. I haven't been there at SEBX for that long, but now I'm starting to understand that if we would have done this sort of in the incumbent bank, it would have been extremely slow. So doing it on the side right now, I think makes perfect sense. The big question for us is going to be, okay, how and when do we do the transition? The incumbent part is they're doing their parts, right? But we can move so much faster and innovate and really sort of try out and test the techniques in a completely different way than the incumbent part.
Yeah, very interesting. Nicole Berry, I'd love to hear from you as you have bank clients that are beginning to make that journey. What are some of the patterns you see from a where to start perspective?
So I think probably just to touch on a few points that Nicole and Tobias both made as well around sort of the learning and the teamwork nature that's required. So there's kind of what workload do we choose to move? What do we start with? What are our technology choices? And obviously all of that's going to be underpinned by setting those goals and objectives and the desired outcomes as Nicole described. But one of the key aspects that we see is absolutely kind of the cultural shift that's required to support cloud adoption. So if I give some examples around that kind of culture of continuous learning, and absolutely as well psychological safety. So being able to learn from what might be considered failures or not being successful, but to turn those into learning opportunities for kind of future improvements. And then also setting up a culture of celebrating successes, small or large, as you make those incremental steps and improvement towards cloud. So as well as the technology and the migration plans, absolutely the cultural aspect as well in terms of the team setup, structure and operating ethos.
Tobias, we have a question from the audience to you, and this is around, what are the key considerations for SEBX that drove you to take the approach that you ended up taking?
So I'd say from a technology perspective, it's about the legacy and the complexity we have in our incumbent part, mainframes and a big, I don't know the word in English, a big mess of different systems, right? And the complexity it creates is just really, really hard to pinpoint where to start. So I think that was one of the main drivers from a technology perspective. But I mean, SEBX also has a sort of a dual purpose. So we're investigating tech. We're trying to build a bank as if it was a new bank, a modern bank, but we're also investigating new business opportunities, right? That's why we're now going out and saying that we're delivering banking as a service. So it has two parts of it. We wanted to explore new business opportunities as well, and we decided to do that outside the old part.
Yeah, excellent. I'd love to hear about any cautionary tales or anti-patterns you want to point out to the audience in both advising clients, watching clients make this move, and having done it yourself. And maybe, Fabien, I'll start with you. If there's anything that comes to your mind, I know you didn't, Thought Machine didn't make the migration in, it just started there. But in your experience, having been doing this for a while, anything that you would give as a cautionary tale?
Yeah, so I think there's two main things that I think caught us out. The first one is the cost. Something that was mentioned earlier on with deploying infrastructure into the cloud using things like Terraform, which we use as well. It makes things very easy to deploy. You can deploy them in a very reproducible way. You can deploy many copies of it. If you want to spin up a dev environment, a UAT environment, performance environment, and so on, those can rack up quite a big bill at the end of the month if you're not careful with how you do it. So there's a lot of benefit in having that reproducibility, but making sure that you have gates in place so that you don't overspend, basically, I think is quite important. The other thing I would say is that something that's been said multiple times in the past already, but application developers need to really shift the way that they think, and they need to start thinking about how different services in the cloud are interacting with each other. Normally, you'd have a single binary, single process, and you could the process by which function calls are made and so on is much easier to reason about than when you have multiple services running in the cloud. And while we do have things like Kubernetes to abstract the underlying infrastructure away, there are other considerations to keep in mind. So that shift in mentality is quite important. So I'd say those are the two main things that you need to be careful with, at least from my point of view.
Yeah. Nicole, Barry, from your perspective, you see it all. Anything you would want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think thinking about kind of the workload and the application characteristics when you're thinking about the first thing or the first project or the first thing that you want to move to cloud is absolutely critical for thinking about the success. I think this sort of touches on the point that that Tobias made as well. So we see lots of approaches that are very incremental in nature, and actually maybe from a cloud perspective, we might not even consider particularly transformational. So very much lift and shift and using a cloud provider's infrastructure, but actually not really changing too much in terms of the underlying technology or the people or the process surrounding that. but that's okay if you're thinking about the approach that you want to take and then making incremental approaches over time. So picking one area to think about modernizing, demonstrating success, and then moving on to the next thing. So it's probably an approach that's considered to be more cautious, but we've absolutely seen be successful.
Nicole Lanza,
if I may,
yeah, please go right ahead.
If I may, Brad, I just want to sort of piggyback on what Nicole said. I think one has to be very aware of that doing a lift and shift, so moving one for one over, is most often very expensive, right? And it doesn't you don't really get the benefits until you go cloud native with the service in itself. So just having a VM from your local data center over to Google or AWS, it's not the way to go. But it's a way to go if you want to be faster at iterating around that, and maybe it's easier to change once you're there. But then again, we're back to the cost bubble that Nicole talked about before, right? You will have a transition cost. That's kind of what I think it's super interesting. In the poll before, there was this about this question, or one of the answers or the problems were around complexity and cost. The first thing I would ask a company saying that is their biggest hinder for moving into the cloud, I would actually ask if they really know their true cost of their infrastructure and the true cost of their complexity. Because I think one of the real benefits of going to the cloud is that becomes very obvious. And there's no easier way to get a good structure of your billing than going cloud. And you get it right on paper what you need to do to sort it. So that's also one thing that I think is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you raised that. Very important point. Nicole Lanza, I'll turn over to you on any closing thoughts on this question around some of the shifts that are having made and where you start.
Yeah, so managing costs from the beginning is absolutely, I think we've all seen this cost spin out of control in the early days. We don't see that as much today because, again, you get FinOps and you have all the right, you use Aptio and all the tooling that allows you to get great visibility into your billing structure and what's really going on. So you can avoid that, but it does have to be actively managed on the front end. And the organization is typically new to that. So they have to figure that out and get help setting that up. I would say that, don't forget the team sport aspect to all of us across your business, and make sure that you're bringing the right folks with you as you go on this journey. A few times I've seen sort of infrastructure parts of a bank sort of go and build things in a vacuum and not really be terribly well aligned or well partnered with lines of business on what they actually wanted to achieve and what they really needed. I often see a difference in maturity between sort of the infrastructure groups that end up standing up the cloud environment and the business. And sometimes the business is way ahead, sometimes technology is way ahead. It varies really on the client, what we see. But regardless, there's almost never somebody who's exactly sort of lined up that everybody says, yes, we want to do this and we know exactly how, and this is how we're going to get business value out of it, and we're all on the same team. And you almost never start at that point. So you do have to make some effort on the front end to make sure that you understand, okay, we're going to start with a data and AI use case, and we think that what we can develop is going to be a revenue generating new product, and this is what it's going to look like. And we're going to go about it in this way. Security, risk, and compliance is going to be handled this way, and everybody ends up sort of aligned around a goal. And maybe you start with something small, certainly like small iterative approach, but it is helpful to make sure that you have a strong partnership between the lines of business and the technology folks. At a minimum, there are certainly other players in a bank.
Yeah, very good advice. Anyone else on the panel had anything else you want to add to this before we transition? Okay. Well, we're coming to the tail end, and I don't think any panel will be complete unless you gave a prediction. So we're kind of looking into 2022 already, but look, the cloud native landscape just keeps, is becoming more vast and complex every day. Just complete proliferation of new cloud native apps, application architectures in production across all industries. And I think it was 451 research said that 95% of new applications are cloud native. With that backdrop, do you have any broad scale predictions for the coming 12 to 18 months? Sort of a lightning round here. Tobias, why don't we start with you?
So I think that what we see now is just going to continue, and if possible, go even faster and with more products from the big providers that we can use to really focus on the business value we add on our side. I mean, I think it's all about moving that commodity level higher and higher, and I'm expecting that to continue.
Fabien?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I think it's around compliance and regulation. So regulators are starting to get up to speed, as Tobias mentioned a while ago, but not quite there yet. Auditors as well are starting to get up to speed, but not quite there yet. There's a lot of education during audits as well. I think automated compliance is going to be a big thing in the coming year and a half. I think that will allow companies in highly regulated environments to be able to smooth that process out, because right now it's not great. So yeah, automated compliance I think is going to be a big thing in the next year now.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, Nicole Berry, Google.
I think for me, it probably touches on some of the comments that Tobias made as well about seeing more of the same, but thinking about this specifically for consumer preferences. So COVID has obviously caused a huge shift in consumer preferences for digital channels, mobile apps, particular features there, internet banking, even chatbots, which personally for me was a bit of a surprise to see a preferential shift towards kind of AI-driven chatbots. And I think my opinion is absolutely seeing more of that acceleration, which really makes the value of cloud so clear in terms of those sort of shifting demands towards digital channels and preferences for our customers.
And last but not least, Nicole Lanza, your thoughts?
Core banking. I mean, what's happening now, and it really has started in the last year or so, is we have a number of banking clients who are looking at moving their core to cloud. Full stop. We have a very interesting use case at the moment, which looks like it's going to drive about a 40% savings for running their core in a cloud environment. So it is real. I know that there's a number of banks out there that will claim that they will never consider it. These are the same banks, by the way, that are actually already looking at it. So it is very real. We're working with a number of clients on this topic, and it's even those who are new to cloud this year, some of them are actually starting with a core migration as opposed to starting with your applications from the distributed environment or a data lake, which I thought particularly interesting. And I think it's because, when you look at it from a business value perspective, this is where you see a significant business value out of adopting cloud. So I think we're seeing a lot of this. It's really how I spend probably 7 hours a day at the moment. So this is real. It's finally happening in banking.
That's good. Well, that's certainly music to my ears. Thank you for that, Nicole.
Sure.
Well, great. We are at the end of time, so I just want to thank the panelists so much. It was a very lively discussion and very informative. And thank you to the audience for taking an hour out of your day to attend. I hope it was a helpful discussion and you're walking away with having learned something or at least having a new perspective. So please be sure to join us, on October 21st for our next Rethinking Webcast, Turbocharging Banking with Real-Time Data. And everyone have a great rest of your evening or day or morning. Thank you all.